I think we all know that this has been quite a year. It's been quite a year for us nationally and how we've been impacted by the coronavirus and political events, you name it. But I want to reflect for a second on and speak a little bit about how this has impacted us personally. Each and every one of us. Each and every one of us stand here today struggling to try to figure out how to be in this new world we sit in at this moment. This new world where we can't quite understand what the next day might be, what the next month might be. It's hard to plan events in the future. There are parents right now who are teaching their children from home, parents who've had the hardest summer possible, imaginable. Now in a new situation, some are homeschooling their kids for the first time. Some are seeing their children stressed and face psychological pressures from not being able to be in community, not being able to be with their friends. We have our elderly, some of whom are in nursing homes, locked away, having to spend months at a time in their room all alone. We have so many people whose jobs have been impacted, who have lost their jobs, or that their business that they actually do has to be done so differently that they basically have a different job. Us rabbis this year have become video producers. We've become video editors, speaking to a camera instead of being in person like we're used to. We've all certainly learned a lot during this period. I myself have been burying, in the early part of this period, even buried people alone. Just myself and the funeral director, burying the casket with the rest of the loved ones and family on phone, on video camera, on Zoom. I remember back to Purim when my colleagues were talking about the idea that there wouldn't be a Megillah reading this year because we wouldn't read the Megillah because the coronavirus is so risky and it's so bad, and I remember fighting against it, saying, no way would we not stop reading the Megillah. I remember them talking about, and the very gross minority even talking about the Seder as well, about the Passover communal Seder. We're going to have to cancel that too. I said, what are you, the Passover, we're canceling the Passover Seder for this? And now I look back at those things and smile at how little I knew and how little we knew, and how much our lives would be changed this year by this pandemic. So many of us are struggling with anxiety, depression, sadness. We each and every one of us feel overburdened by the pressures that are put on us to live our everyday lives, to take care of our families, to bring home money and food for our children, to find fulfillment in our lives in this new reality when so many of the things that brought us fulfillment are difficult to attain anymore, being that it's so hard to do things in public and do things with other people right now. I found some empathy. I found some, maybe a model of who we are and where we stand with one of the biggest characters of Yom Kippur, the most important characters within our tradition, which is of course the Kohen Gadol, the high priest. The high priest would do the sacrifice on Yom Kippur, the biggest sacrifice of the year, and it would depend on this one Kohen, the leading Kohen, the leading priest, to do this sacrifice. It'd be the one time of year where he would enter the Holy of Holies, where the Ark of the Covenant is, and he would have to do this precise, very difficult and complicated ritual, which we usually detail in our Musaf service, in our Yom Kippur service, and in doing so would attain the forgiveness of God for the Jewish people. He would represent the entire Jewish people in that Holy of Holies, in that amazing ceremony. But what's very interesting is we don't realize sometimes who this Kohen Gadol was. I think in our minds, we picture this Kohen Gadol, this leading Kohen, to be like the most knowledgeable Kohen in the world, right? We picture maybe a much older person, wise for many years, having done sacrifices all his life, and really was the teacher of all other Kohanim probably, and just like this unbelievable expert in sacrifices and love of the Jewish people, and you name it. You can go on and on of the ideas in your head. Maybe some kind of Santa Claus figure. But when actually looking in the texts within our tractate that speaks about the laws of Yom Kippur, Tractate Yoma, literally the tractate of the day, meaning the holiest day of the year, Yom Kippur, we see right from the beginning that the Kohen Gadol was separated 7 days before doing this sacrifice of the day of Yom Kippur to make sure that he was kept pure, and he was sequestered away within the temple. That I knew. But what I learned this year that's so interesting that we see in the Mishnah is it seems that the Kohen Gadol, at least in the latter period of the Second Temple, in the end of the days, especially in the times in which the rabbis were writing, when the temple was kind of on its last grounds before being destroyed by the Romans, really starting after the Maccabees, the Maccabee revolt that we celebrate during Hanukkah, the Kohen Gadol really became a political position. It was a political appointment, so it was not generally given to the most knowledgeable Kohen in the world. It might have been given to a Kohen who had never done sacrifices in the temple, but had somehow done some favor for the king, or gotten someplace very well politically. And we see this in the Mishnah. The commentaries say this over and over again, that the Kohen Gadol was not necessarily the most experienced or wise Kohen there was, so much so that during the 7th period, it wasn't for him just to be away from other things and to somehow remain pure and holy, but it was also so the other Kohanim could teach that Kohen what to do, how to do the sacrifices. And I'll give you some examples of what we see within the Mishnah. The sages and the Kohanim would show this Kohen Gadol who was going to do this one person who's going to do this sacrifice, he would have to show him animals, the different animals. Why? The Mishnah says to familiarize him with animals. Right? This Kohen might have never sacrificed an animal before, or might not know the difference between the different animals. Maybe if you're not working every day in the temple, you might not know these things. If you're some political appointee who's just been put in, where you're some person who just finds himself in at this moment doing this difficult job, you might not necessarily know, which animal's which. They had to show him which animal's which. There's one scene that even shows that both parties, the Kohen Gadol who was being taught and the other Kohanim and wise teachers who were teaching them, as they were teaching them, they would take breaks to cry because both parties were so sure something was going to go wrong during the sacrifice. Crying that this Kohen Gadol was the wrong person. Like, if only we could have this much wiser, much more knowledgeable, much more experienced person. But that wasn't the case. And each party knew that there was nothing to do to change it now. That each party would have to do the best they can. The other Kohanim and teachers to teach this Kohen Gadol was going to do the sacrifices, how to do the sacrifices, to be the best teachers they possibly can. And of course the Kohen Gadol, the candidate who is going to do the sacrifice on Yom Kippur, to try his best in order to do it even though he was not prepared adequately. The Kohen Gadol would not be given food the day before doing the sacrifices. Why? Just because food makes us fall asleep. It makes us too comfortable. And they were afraid the Kohen Gadol was going to fall asleep during the sacrifices, God forbid, or sleep through the day. If someone was really an expert, would you sleep through the most holy day of the year? Is that really a worry? They had him doing regular sacrifices during the 7 days that were just done regularly before Yom Kippur, just so he can get used to doing sacrifices, we hear in the Mishnah. So over and over again, we get examples that the Kohen Gadol was not this most experienced, the best Kohen you could possibly find. He was a political appointee. He was someone who was chosen for that job, not necessarily because he was the best. He was someone who found himself doing this job for whatever reason. Yet, they kept going. Yet, the teachers would teach, and the Kohen Gadol would go and do his service. Even though he knew that there was a rope that is going to be tied around his legs unless he gets stricken down inside the Holy of Holies, and then the other Kohanim could pull him out if God doesn't like his service. Even still, the Kohen Gadol would go and do what he had to do. Why? Because he was doing it for the rest of the Jewish people. He was doing it for the community. There's an idea that's brought about specifically about when the Kohen was looking at the animals. The Midrash asks, why was he supposed to be looking at these animals? Is there a more homiletic meaning why he's looking at the other teachers were getting him to recognize all these different animals before doing the sacrifice? And the Midrash says at one point, the reason is because the Kohen is supposed to meditate and contemplate on the idea that each and every one of us, that he is just like each of these animals. That he is no different than any other human being in this world, just because he was selected to do this sacrifice. The only reason he is held above or to do something different is because he is doing the sacrifice, that he was given the job to make a sacrifice before God for the Jewish people, to serve the whole entire community. That is the reason why he's given kavod or given honor. It's not because there's something in him that's somehow better or a higher pedigree. It's just because he is the one doing the job. Just as the animals that he was being shown look like normal animals, but they're going to be the animals that will be sacrificed and made as a korban, as a sacrifice to God on Yom Kippur. And those animals will become holy and special through that process. Not because somehow each animal, that unique animal, is special in some way. That was the animal that was chosen. It's the task that a person does in this life. It's who they serve. That they serve God, they serve community, they serve others. That makes a person who they are. It's not some intrinsic value that somehow the Kohen Gadol is better than everyone else or more skilled or more knowledgeable. No. It's the dedication of the Kohen to do the job that he was supposed to do. That even though he was afraid and even though he was terrified, I'm sure, and so too were his teachers and all of the Jewish people, that he was going to walk on and do what he needed to do, even though he had no reason to even be there. That maybe he was appointed for some crazy reason, he was put in there. Even though he knows he's not particularly the right person to be doing this job, he needs to take one step forward. He needs to keep taking one step after another and try his best to do what he needs to do. I think this is each of us in our day. Some of us are learning how to be teachers to our children. Some of us are learning how to be videographers. We're all learning new skills right now. We're all trying to figure out what we should be doing right now to find meaning and to do the things that we need to do in this world. And in some ways, and each of us are like the Kohen Gadol. Meaning that for the things that we do, they really do matter. Our choices that we make really do matter. It's would be a much easier way to deal with this anxiety and stress we're dealing with of not knowing and being in the mystery of this moment, to say, whatever we do right now doesn't really matter. And that's just not true. Right? The hard news is what we do does matter. Our decisions do impact our lives during this time. We do have to make money during this time. We do have to get food on the table. We do have to teach our children. We do have to go about our lives. We can't just pause ourselves. We have to do it safely and do it in a healthy way to prevent this pandemic from spreading, God forbid. Right? But on the other hand, we do have to go on with our lives and finding these things. One of the great case examples of this, of course, was the Honorable Ruth Bader Ginsburg, who has recently passed away right before Rosh Hashanah. Many of us today think she was some kind of unbelievable, all her life feminist revolutionary hero, right? The way we picture her now. But in listening to the biographies that have come out about her and the different people speaking about their lives and kind of telling the story of her life, we see that's not really the case for most of her life. One example of this is when she was asked, why did she go to Harvard Law School? Why did she want to go? And she said, because that's where my husband was going. Right? That's what my husband was. Marty Ginsburg was going to be a lawyer. He's going to Harvard, so I'm going to go to Harvard. I just wanted to see what he was doing. Right? We see that the Honorable Ruth Bader Ginsburg, may her memory be a blessing, did not see herself as some kind of perfect candidate, perfect person to change the world. She didn't see it that way from the beginning. Rather, she made small choices to live her life in the best way she could in this time when she knew that she was living through persecution, living through a time when women were not treated equally. She was going to do her best to live her best life, to have a good relationship with her husband, and try to make something for herself in this world. But she realized that she was a talented lawyer, that she was actually sort of good at this. And she went on to fight. And one thing that she did fight for equality of the sexes throughout her time as a litigator and then as a judge. But one thing that's different, I think, than when we think of her today is that she didn't fight just for women or just for herself. She actually fought for equality of the sexes, or equality of all different kinds, not just her own sex or her own identities, but for everyone's identity. She originally started fighting for equality in the courts because actually to make sure that men have equal treatment to women. Right? Her first cases for gender equality were not fighting for women's equality to men. It was actually men's equality towards women, where men were treated differently than women in bad ways for men. And that's how she actually made the Supreme Court and made the courts realize that there was something wrong with treating one gender different than the other, because she saw how men were impacted. A very good way of communicating that. But it wasn't just a political move. It was for her, that's what it really was about. It was about everybody. It's about everybody being equal. She believed that each person's most important job was to be a human being. And that's it. Not to be a woman, not to be a man, not to be a white person or a black person or whatever it may be, but to be a human being. That's the highest task of a person. What she said was the highest task of a human being, and that's what she fought for. Now that's so different than we see as a fierce revolutionary who's fighting for women and fighting for this and that and changing the world. She did not see herself that way. Eventually, the way she became this was when in 2007, when she was already the age of 74, and she already was even a Supreme Court justice, and she was 63, so she was already a Supreme Court justice for 11 years. She read her dissent out loud in the Ledbetter versus Goodyear case, a case where a woman was found out later after she retired that she was not being paid the same amount as her male counterparts at the Goodyear factory. And she fought to make sure that this woman was able to sue and get that money back that she should have been making equal to the other men. Right? She lost that case to a 5-4 majority, but it was the first time ever that she actually read that dissent aloud. Read the reason why. Of course, the reason being that it wasn't fair, that men and women should be treated equally. And from then on, after 2007, she became this great dissenter, this great hero. But most of her life, she was just trying to do small acts of goodness. She didn't think she was some kind of revolutionary or a big deal. She just kept working to do good. And eventually she did change the world. She's changed the world forever, making more equality in this world. She's left us a legacy of equality between the sexes. Of course, we still have a lot of work to do. But without her, we would be so much more far behind. In that way, I think we each need to be like the Honorable Ruth Bader Ginsburg. We each need to be like the Kohen Gadol. Walking ahead even though we are afraid, taking small steps forward, even though we feel like we're an imposter sometimes, to try to live our lives, to try to do good. The defining aspect of a human being who does good in this world, who finds meaning, whether you're the Honorable Justice, may her memory be a blessing, or you're the Kohen Gadol, is if you're doing it and working for others. If you're trying to do good for others, if you're trying to make the world a better place, if you're trying to make your family a better place, if you're trying to do good in the place that you find yourself in, because again, we don't get the choice what place we find ourselves in. The Honorable Ruth Bader Ginsburg said, "Whatever you choose to do, leave tracks. And that means don't do just for yourself, because in the end, it's not going to be fully satisfying. I think you will want to leave the world a little better for your having lived. And there's no satisfaction that a person can gain from just what people call turning over a buck that's equal to the satisfaction that you get from knowing that you have made another's life, your community, a little better for your effort." Well, the Honorable Justice certainly made her community a lot better with her effort. But what happens if we think the same way? That no matter where we find ourselves in, no matter how bad the situation is, that we become people who work for everyone's good, to do a little bit of good. Even though we're not the right person, even though we're not the most skilled, in the end, as Rabbi Nachman famously said, the world depends on each and every person. The world was built for each and every person. And which he then said is the reason why we have to work and pray to make it better all the time. We have the responsibility. We can't desist from that responsibility to make the world a better place, to try to do good in this world, in whatever place we find ourselves in at every single moment. And yes, we are unskilled. Yes, we don't know. Yes, there could be better people to be teaching our children or doing whatever job we're struggling with right now. But we are the people who have to do this job right now, each and every one of us in the struggle we sit in. And yes, it's going to be hard. And yes, it's going to be difficult. And yes, we're going to cry. And yes, we're going to be frightened. But like the Honorable Justice, we're going to take one step forward. We're going to work for our communities and work for others to make the world a better place. Shana Tova, everybody.